Lebanon Daily News in Lebanon County, and one of my beats there was covering county government. So I learned very early how much county commissioners are responsible for, and so I have a great respect for the work you do, the challenges you face, and so thank you very much for what you're doing for communities all across the state. This morning, of course, I'd like to talk a little bit about the right to know law. I do have a PowerPoint. The material, this information will all be available on our website after the conference, so anybody who's interested in it, if you're interested in the content of the slides, it will be very easy to get. First, I'd like to encourage folks not to fear transparency. I think it's something that constituents expect today. Secretary Richards touched on it with some of the things that PennDOT is doing with their projects website. I'm very much looking forward to tracking snowplows in real time to see when my roads will get cleared. Things like that constituents really expect these days. And as the Supreme Court said in one of its early decisions on the right to know law, the real goal of this law is to empower citizens by giving them access to the information of what their government is doing. Some ways that you can do this will actually cut right to know requests up front, which I recognize that responding to right to know requests takes time. It is not always simple, but the more you can make available online up front, the more you will cut down your right to know requests. We see it time and time again. Things like RFPs and contracts, park maps, meeting minutes, budget documents, the things that your constituents want to see. And one way to figure out how to do this is to look at other county websites. Two in particular I think do a very good job are Lancaster County and Montgomery County. What they both have that I think is excellent is a section that's actually called How Do I ... And so people who want to know how do they register to vote, how do they find out what's going on with the county budget, how do they learn about the county park system. It's a very simple, easy way to get information to people, and I think it's a format that works very well. One of the perhaps underestimated employees in every local agency now, but including at the county level, is the agency open records officer. Every county has one. I hope you have a good one. This person is responsible for communicating with requesters. And believe me, I understand that requesters can be challenging to deal with sometimes. Your requesters become my appellants. So when something is denied and somebody comes in front of us with an appeal, we're dealing with the same requesters that you're all dealing with. The vast majority of them, absolutely terrific, but there are always going to be a few who are a real challenge to deal with. And so having an arrow who is capable of doing that is really critical as one of the first steps to having a good county response to the right to know law. The arrow also needs to understand agency record keeping. It needs to be somebody who's familiar with where they can find records throughout county government, who they need to ask if something exists or where it exists. And they also need to be able to meet tight and pretty inflexible deadlines. One thing I would encourage folks to take back is to have your arrow communicate with requesters. Requesters can always give you extensions. The basic timeline in the law is a 5 business day response, but counties can extend that by up to 30 calendar days for a variety of reasons. And if you have a request that for whatever reason is going to take longer than that, there's absolutely no reason not to reach out to the requester, have a conversation, explain what's going on, that you're doing the work to try and respond to the request, but it's going to take more time. And often what we see is when requesters feel like they're getting some back and forth with an agency, they're very willing to extend those deadlines. We have the same deadline. When an appeal comes into our office, we have 30 days to get all the information we need to decide it and to issue a decision. And so we have those same kinds of conversations with appellants, requesters, and often we're able to get an additional 30 days or even longer in some cases. So I think those kinds of conversations can be very helpful to counties. The right to know law, I recognize we have here today a mix of newly elected and seasoned veterans. The right to know law, just to touch on it a little bit, the basic premise is that all government records are available for public inspection. There are, of course, exceptions. There are 30 exceptions in the right to know law itself. Other state statutes, federal statutes, regulations, court orders, all of those things can also take records from a public status to a non-public status. In the right to know law, some of the exceptions that are most commonly used include those that relate to public safety and personal safety, social security numbers, driver's license numbers, bank account numbers, all those sort of things tend to be included in the exceptions. Employee performance reviews, medical records, internal pre-decisional deliberations, that's one that comes up quite often in a county context. So when you are doing internal pre-decisional deliberations, when you're deliberating something for the future, often those discussions can be exempted. Again, though, talk to your ARO, talk to your solicitor, because there is now a growing body of case law that gives better definition to those things, and it needs to be all of those things. It needs to, for example, remain internal, so that if your email discussion includes people outside of the agency, it's no longer internal, so it can no longer meet that exception. Certain investigative records, both criminal and non-criminal, we see those come up quite a bit as well. A record, this is really the fundamental definition here, the most important part of the law in many ways. A record is something, regardless of what form it takes, that documents a transaction or activity of an agency. The Commonwealth Court, in a recent case that has drawn some media attention, talked about whether or not emails that were circulating around the Attorney General's office were records. They decided that they were not, because those emails in question did not document a transaction or activity of the agency. The way I like to explain this to people is, you know, if you're emailing somebody saying, hey, let's go grab a pizza for lunch today, or you're communicating with your wife on your agency email saying, you know, can you pick up the kids tonight? I'm going to be late, that sort of thing. None of those things really document a transaction or activity of an agency. So the right to know law is not trying to get every record that you as county commissioners create. It's only interested in those that document a transaction or activity of the agency. The right to know law, however, does not distinguish between email and paper. It does not distinguish between agency devices and personal devices. In other words, you can't get around the right to know law simply by using a Gmail account on your personal telephone, things like that. The right to know law only cares whether the thing in question is a record, and if it is, then we do the secondary analysis to determine whether or not that record is public. And that's, of course, applying the test of whether or not any of the exemptions deal with that record. A best practice that we found, the right to know law really went into business on January 1st of 2009, so we have basically 7 years of experience, and a best practice that we found is whenever you can, if you have agency devices, do agency work on those devices. It will save you time in responding to the right to know law. It will also save you time if there's some other need, such as a lawsuit, where you need to gather records on a particular topic. One of the things that the right to know law does not address is record retention. However, that doesn't mean that it's not important. I think it's absolutely critical. If your county has a good record retention policy, fabulous. If it doesn't, please look into getting one. The Historical and Museum Commission has a county records manual that's available. It's a tremendous starting point. Any good record retention policy has to balance the need for transparency with the need for the agency to function. You cannot, for example, simply say our record retention policy is 0 days, everything gets deleted on an ongoing basis. A, your agency couldn't function that way, but B, I think your constituents would have a lot of questions on the transparency front and a lot of uncomfortable questions potentially. The Office of Open Records does not enforce the Sunshine Act. We do, however, provide training on the Sunshine Act.